All right, welcome everyone. Hopefully everyone is having a good day. It is a great day here in North Carolina today, and I am stuck inside. I should be doing this training outside. It is a sunny, warm day, not too hot, not too cold. So we are going to be talking about some wood art today. It is a form of wood inlay. If anybody is wondering what the difference between the title of our topic is today versus what inlay is. The marquet is more of an artistic way, just doing a quick search. Before we get into this, please feel free if you have any questions, just unmute yourself, ask the question. We don't have that many on today, so feel free to unmute. If it becomes too much, I could just mute us all and we'll move on, but always use the chat window as well. So what we're going to take a look at today is how can we make a picture out of various shapes and colors of wood. As I said, this is somewhat a form of inlay. And if you do a search for, got one here for the marquet, and then another search for inlay. Notice that a lot of them are very similar to one another, and the technical differences are very, very little between the two. Typically what we have as this picture here would not really be considered an inlay, even though we are inlaying material on it. So an inlay is typically would be considered something like we have here, where they've pocketed out some area and left material to fit in another piece. The marquet is more like a puzzle that will create an ultimate picture of some sort, where one piece or is not really defined that we're pocketing out of. There are a bunch of pieces out that we're fitting together. You could get quite complicated with the design, and as you can see, just through some of these, Google searches, it's quite amazing what you're able to really do with just, different species of wood to be able to bring those together. Today, we're not going to get as fancy as some of these. We are going to work with Donald Duck. He is a fairly easy shape to create. And we're going to, first, you got a bonus here because I started the process to kind of pre-bake the design a little bit. And when I unplugged the computer to move into an area where it's better suited for a presentation, where I'm away and not bothering anyone else, my computer crashed on me. And unfortunately, I did not save what I was working on. So bonus is one, remember to save always. Number two is you're going to see a little bit more of creating the vectors that are going to go into creating these inlaid puzzle type pieces. So why don't we just get right to it? We're going to jump into VCarve Pro. So VCarve Pro or Aspire both work the same. We're not doing any three-dimensional work, although I have done in the past a combination of this process, both 3D and combining a cutout to create a colored multiple depth scene. So I'll start off by creating a new file. I'm not going to worry about exact size yet because we could always resize. That's the beauty of vectors. We're able to resize and scale without any distortion loss or resolution loss. So I'm going to just start off with a 12 by 12 size, and we'll figure out the depth of our material and all that. We could do that after the fact and come back into it. So we'll say okay to this. And what I have done, cheated a little bit. I'm not going to draw Donald Duck from scratch. I went out to the Google and found a line drawing or a picture of Donald Duck. and just selecting that as a JPEG. So I selected the import and running it as a JPEG. Then I select open, and there he is. He's a happy Donald today. You don't often see Donald Duck as being happy. He's usually quite mad. So anyway, here we go. This is a fairly clean drawing as far as the pixels go. So you might think, yeah, this is going to be an awesome one for us to be able to use the automatic tracing feature for. And you would be right, other than the process to get all these pieces to fit, the automatic ways end up going to cost us a lot more work. And we'll see why here in just a second. So we're going to first do the automatic tracing to show you why it doesn't work, and what we have to do, what we would have to do to clean it up. And then we'll take a step back and undo all of that and then work on the way that we need to have it. So first, Vector does have an automatic way of making a bitmap trace, which works fairly well, especially on a clean image like we have here. So I'm not going to adjust any of the details because we don't have too much noise. It's again, fairly clean. So I'm going to go ahead and click preview. And it's done a decent job of it. And we'll go ahead and apply. So it has created our vectors, and fairly cleanly. Even going into node editing, so we'll ungroup those. We see we have some nice smooth vectors that are going around. But remember, we need to have these pieces fit together like a puzzle. And one of the things that the automatic tracing does is it traces along the outside and the inside of the shape. So this would work great if we just wanted to, do a V-carving of them. So we're just going to see how that works. Just to see how cleanly it would have worked if we didn't want to do the inlaying. And yeah, it doesn't look too bad. Looks like it would have done all right. Yeah, fairly good for a bitmap import. But now let's step back and look at what we need to really do. So going to select all of those and delete that. And we're going to focus only on the picture and create these vectors and lines ourselves using just the line tool. And I'm not going to spend I don't think the entire time doing the whole body. Let's just focus on his head and see how it goes. So we want to separate what we see as different colors. So let's just do a quick search here for. So blue hat, maybe some light blue eyes, black eyeballs, yellow beak, red, and a pink mouth in here. So we want to think about these pieces as far as the colors go and draw and align our vectors based on what colors and how we want to have those lined out. So go ahead and coming back into the VCarve Pro. Just going to zoom in and we'll work on the hat and the little tag back here. I'm not sure what that would be called. So anyway, we're going to start right here and I'm going to click out a little off of that part, just drawing out lines. And I'm putting the lines in later, going to convert these lines into curves. So I'm clicking on the areas that I think a start and the end point of an arc would be. And I've already messed up. So let me back out and just undo and start all over again because I want just the hat. I started going a little too far around the head there. And if you're not real precise with the placement of these endpoints, that is okay, because we are going to use node editing to later fine tune these shapes. So coming back to the beginning, there is the hat going into node editing. And I'm not sure how I feel about the new method of when you're drawing, how you're able to lines and convert it to a Bezier as you're going along. I'm not certain I'm happy with that. But that is maybe just me. So I'm going around clicking the letter S, and the S is for smooth. I know that's smoothing because when I right click over top of a node, I see smooth point, and there is the S. So that means you could just hover your mouse over top of any node and it's going to smooth it out. And once we have that part done, the hat is about done. We're good with that. Going to escape out of the node editing, use the scissor tools to trim away the overlapping sections there. Later, we will put in maybe another vector here to do a V carving on. But right now, we're just separating the parts as like a chunk for color separation. Going to run through the same process. Tag. Again, if anyone has any questions while I'm doing this, please ask them. So at this point, I'm not going to close out. I am going to just escape out of the line tool now and fit these vectors with those being overlapped. So again, just using the S to smooth these shapes out and then move the control points to a location that best matches the shape. I'm going to modify node edit the hat just a little bit more. I see it's off there a little bit and also off the top of his head. Needed a little adjusting and fixing. So that is basically two shapes. Now to ensure that we have the same arc for when we cut this tab out of a separate piece of material from the main part, we need to make sure that these two arcs are identical. So I'm not going to trace this line. We're just going to make a copy and duplicate it. So the way I do that, oh, look at that, I'm off there just a little bit more. So I'm going to use the right arrow to bump that over, and then there we go. So selecting the main outline that we have here, I'm going to do a control copy. So I copied that to the clipboard. If I did a control paste right now, that is going to paste a duplicate copy directly on top of what I've just pasted. I'm not going to do that just yet. I'm going to take a couple trimming actions, and then we will paste that back in. So hopefully you'll understand what's going on, and use the scissors to trim that section away. So we've lost the hat, or so it seems, and only have the connecting tail here. So at this point is when I'm going to do the control V, that is pasting that back in. So we now have the main hat, and we have overlapping vectors at this point right here, but that's exactly what we want to have, because later when we're finished with our design, we are going to separate this out and separate them into separate pieces. Let's work on the top of his head at this point. And the way that you want to think about, again, how to do this is based on the material that we're going to use. So we're going to come trace around the top of his head, the top of his beak, up around his eyes and finish the top of its head. So see how that works out. I'm going to use the object snap to snap at the endpoint of that line. And this is where, see, that was that automatic tracing there, which sometimes is helpful, but for me, I prefer not to have it. There it is again, so I didn't want that to happen. And I'll explain after I finish going through this what is going on with that. And I should have paid a little bit more time to see if there's a way to shut that feature off. So zooming in is the scroll wheel. Zooming out, is also the wheel. Holding the center button down allows us to, when we're zoomed in, to be able to pan around. I am going to snap right there to the endpoint of that. So I'm going to escape to close the line function tool and going to run the same type of node editing that we were doing before. So I didn't do a smooth, I did to an arc there. And sometimes I do not a smoothing, sometimes I do an arc to get that somewhat close, then come back, convert those two arcs back to a Bezier curve, then smooth. Sometimes it saves a little bit of steps. See here, I need more of a sharp point there. So I'm going to convert this line segment back to a line. And then we could go about smoothing. And it is possible to do a sweep select and do a smooth of more than one node at a time. So we could select both of those and just type the letter S. You don't have to do them individually, although I tend to do that most of the time. I'm not sure I understand the question, but I think the answer is yes. There's probably a way of doing that with the automatic trace. So I could go in and delete all of those lines. We'll come back to that. Now I get what you're saying. And delete all the inside lines. You could, but then you have some extending lines to deal with. And I'll come back to that. That's a good question. I kind of skimmed over that and didn't really fully explain the challenges of the automatic trace. So now with that completed, we want to have the top part in the hat, top of his head and the hat, to have the same exact curve. So I'm going to go through the exact same process as I did before. And this is where you start having to really pay attention to know where the overlapping parts are and pay attention to this area here as we do this. So I'm going to do a Control C to copy that to the clipboard or the Windows clipboard, then use the scissoring tools to trim that away. So it looks like that's what we are done with, and it looks like we're ready to paste in. But remember I said pay attention to this area right here. We have a little bit that'll end up causing us probably some grief a little bit later. That is the just a little arc right there between there that the trim just didn't take away. So I want to delete that because we don't want little overlapping and open vectors like that. So again, always pay attention to where things are. Going to do a Control V at this point And there it is. And one thing I will mention that hopefully is obvious, when you do that control copy to the clipboard, you want to be cautious to not copy anything else to the clipboard because you've lost what you've done. And I'll the next time we trace around his beak and his mouth here, I'll show another technique that we could use to maybe a little bit of insurance to know that we're getting it right or not going to lose something here. So again, going to snap to the endpoint here. Just go around. So the automatic tracing is definitely a nice feature, but at the same time, it sometimes causes you more work and cleanup than the process actually saves. So you kind of, it's hard to know when that is because sometimes you get so into fixing the automatic trace or cleaning it up that you forget, kind of lose track of how much time you actually spent in doing so. All right, escape out of that. So going into node editing, going to go around and smooth all of the points out. And as we're doing this, we also want to pay attention, since this is somewhat of an inlay type, we need to start thinking at least about external and internal radiuses. What bit are we going to use? What size are we going to be making this item? Just, an item in here, making sure that that curve is going to be big enough for a cutter to get into that location. Sorry for my silence there. That was me concentrating. All right, now one thing I do not want to do is make a modification to this one here after I've made this connection, because we need to have all of these together and fitting together. So with that done under the eyes, actually I shouldn't have stopped where I did. That's okay. We have that line tool that could just easily be opened and finish that out. All right, so since I did that separately, I'm going to put both of those. No, I did all right. All right. So now the trick, and one thing that we can do, and this is right click or just open up another instance of VCarve Pro. I'm going to create a new file and say, okay. So we just created this section here that I want to be able to map in with this section on top. So I'm going to do a Control C, Going over to the other instance in a Control V, it pastes it directly back in, and it is in the same location. So it's very important not to have it relocate or drag and drop it in a different location. But this allows us to now kind of separate that out a little bit and trim those sections away and do a Control copy. Coming back to this version here, we do not need this section or that part there, and do a Control V, and that pastes that back in. So once we start getting more in depth into getting them aligned, you might need to bring them outside to be able to bring them back in. I'm going to do the exact same thing for the eyes. And it is very easy to kind of get lost and confused on what things are, because it looks right when we're looking at it here, but when we go to bring it over into that other instance, it doesn't look, it's kind of hard to figure out what's going on. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is make the eyes their own little separate pieces. Going to do a Control copy, coming back over to other instance that we have open. I don't need that on the screen, and paste that in, and use the scissor tools to get rid of everything that we do not want. Now we're left with the challenge to figure out what's really going on here. You see how this isn't quite finishing around to that point, and up top. So let's go into node editing. I'm going to select the nodes at the endpoint of that. Right click and select cut vector, but I'm going to remember that letter C. So that allows us to be able just to delete the cut section with that there. Again, node edit, and I remembered that C, so I'm just going to type C for cut and delete that section there. And see, we have kind of an overlapping vector there as well. Go into, again, node editing, cut. So there are the two separate eyes. Do a Control copy and Control V, which we're not going to see any real difference here as far as the overall picture looks. And the reason for that is, we're just basically duplicated vectors, but to get them separate. I am going to remember to save. I should have done a long time ago, because I hate doing work twice, although the second time I do it definitely could get better. Layers, Paul is recommending layers. Absolutely, that is another way to help keep things in line and organized. So organization is really the key that we're trying to do, and keeping it separate and only work on one area at a time, because it's very easy to get lost and get little bits and pieces that are hanging out there that'll end up causing you problems later. So I think we're almost done. We got to do the inside of his mouth, and I don't know if that's his tongue. I'm not exactly sure what that is. And this is also an area that we have to kind of pay attention to on what cutter we're going to be using here, because I am going to start up top, and it is going to give us a fairly sharp inside corner that, round bit square corner isn't going to work for us. But I'll worry about that when we, a little bit later, when we go to start planning the tool paths for this. And just using the S key to smooth those out. I could have selected all the objects that I wanted to have smooth. I accidentally hit the page up button. Yeah, that separates there, so not what I wanted to do. For fine tuning, rather than using the mouse to move these around, just the arrows on the keyboard also is able to kind of bump those nodes around, those control points. Sometimes it's easier to be a little bit finer or have a little bit finer control that way. All right, getting closer. Now, before I trim those away, sometimes that could get me in trouble what I just did there because I end up needing to be over top. So I'm going to undo that, and we'll hopefully understand why. I'm going to create the shape down below first because sometimes you might, like I said, move the node on top that's outside of the area first. So that kind of matches up pretty good now. And then just use the scissor tools to get rid of that. This is a fairly simple trimming process, so I'm not going to copy to the other one, but again, Control C to copy the inside boundary of his mouth and do a trim, and then a Control V. So now I think we have all of hat. Yeah, the only thing maybe we should do is copy the black eyeballs in there. So let's give that a go. I'm going to undo that just because that automatic. So what that is and what's happening, let me just kind of show. When you're tracing, if you drag as you're moving around, keep the mouse held down, it converts automatically lines into smooth Bezier. It's something I should maybe practice with some because I could see maybe it could be more useful and easier to do that. It's just new, and I'm not, most of the time I'm excited about change. I like change, but sometimes it's just, I'm used to something and it's the way I like it to be. All right, so this one, I am going to do a copy and paste. So I just did a sweep select, select everything, copy, go over to another instance here, delete what's already on the screen, and paste that in. Looks like we might have some duplicate vectors that all right, so let's see what happens. Delete everything that we don't want. Sweep select, control copy, and control, oh, let me undo that because again, it's leaving those little bits in there would have cost us some time later on. So now paste that back in. So now we have a version of the outline of all the different components that we would want to have cut in a different colored material. There's some details that we could maybe fill in and see how they work. You know, a little crease in his hat right there. So I'm just gonna finish that up now. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna expand a little bit and see how that click in. I could see maybe you could get used to that. Yeah, that's a skill I think to work there, but you could see I at least tried to change. Eventually, I'll probably find an easier way of managing that. For the extensions here, going to do right from the end of that line out. Put that on very slight arc. Another one, top of his hat. Later, maybe create a little engraving V-bit line or just some sort of engraving to show what this looks like. Just around his beak now. For this one, I'm going to actually extend it way out beyond. Edit and convert it to an arc. And the reason that I went out beyond is to get a trim rather than trying to snap to a certain endpoint there. All right. Now, oh, almost one more. We want to really try to make sure that you get all the detail done now before we start breaking this apart, because then later we're not going to have the picture to align it to anymore. We still have to figure out. I'm not sure what we're going to do in this area here to create that sharp inside corner. I don't know. there are, techniques that we can do with it to be able to get that sharp inside. That's the V-carving type inlay, which is kind of another tutorial in itself. It is one that I've not personally attempted yet or ever tried it, but it is and would give the ability to be able to create that sharp inside corner of his mouth there. I'm just noticing this area should be connected. Where it could get a little bit challenging. We have a node here, so if I move this node here, it's not going to hopefully affect anything over there. So let's just see what happens. Oh, I'm good. So if any of the item arcs that moved over in this area here, we would have to make sure that we make the same arc change through this section of both pieces to keep those the same. It's going to continue a line straight through there. No, just leave it as a straight line. We'll never know it. All right. Again, save. And sometimes at this point, I might even do a save as. And call it Donald 1 and save. So now we've kind of locked that version in time to where if I get like completely lost and confused on what things are and where they are, it could always come back and revert back to it without having to do multiple undos to get that done. So now we could start thinking about what overall size do we want this to be. Delete. I don't need to delete the picture. It's going to go into the layers and turn the bitmap layer off. And let's say we want to have his head to be, say, a 10-inch total size. So this point is when I will run the object size and set it to be 10 inches. Having the X and Y linked, it will proportionally change both. And well, we can't do 10 inches because the Y is too high. So let's make it 10 inches in the Y. There we go. All right, so now we need to start separating and pulling this apart. And I think we'll start with the issue that we're going to have right here with his mouth about getting this to fit. So all of the vectors, I'm just going to shift those off to the side. And make sure that this is when layers might really come in handy, because there is a hat. We could move that to a new layer and kind of help keep them together, because we have this little bit right there that we don't. Another way to do it is grouping that together. If you ever want to know what Donald looks like without a hat, there it is. I don't know if I've ever seen him without a hat. Thinking ahead, because I'm breaking this apart, I may not know exactly how all these parts need to go back together again. So before we break this apart, let's go and just make another duplicate copy. I'm going to keep that attached and not going to separate this one here. So again, that section together. there's a problem right there that we need to fix, but that's okay. I think we could still do it. Hopefully understanding what I'm doing here. So the issue that we had or have is the eyes and the so the eyeballs are good. This outer side is not. So what we need to do is trim some of this section away. So I'm going to just do a control copy there on the eye. Actually, yeah, control copy. Let's see how this works. That didn't work out so well. So what I'm really trying to do here is we see how this continues all the way around. It should not continue all the way around. We need to have this part and this part be the same. So I'm going to go into node editing and see where those points are. And luckily, we do have endpoints there. So I'm going to do a control cut and a cut there, which now left us with this bit here. We could cut out and remove that. Hopefully we have the same kind of thing happening there. Sure enough, we do. And of course, you know what I'm going to have to do is undo everything that we just did there. And the reason, well, actually, no, we don't, because I wish I could say I was smart enough to make this duplicate for this reason, but just got lucky that we could pull those over to there. All right, so now we have all of the pieces that we need to cut. And all of them need to be cut out separately. And they all need to, one more piece that we need. So there, I think, are all of our pieces that we need to start laying out and verifying the tool pathing is going to fit. So let's just kind of look at these two areas here and see how they work, because the inside corner there is we're going to have the biggest challenge in being able to, I think, get them to look right when it's done. So if we cut on the inside here, which is great, but we're not going to be able to get all the way up into the sharp corner here. And if we cut this out on the outside to inlay into this section here, it's not going to go all the way up. It's going, well, let's just take a look. So first, we're not going to use the inlaying tool, but we will come back to it. I'm going to do a profile cut. What our Z is. So I just typed in the letter Z and then equals, because we do want to cut all the way through. And do an 1/8 inch bit. It's a fairly small bit, but we should be able to do that just fine. Cut on the inside. And come back to the 2D view. And I'm going to turn this solid to toggle the solid on and off, just so we could see what is actually going to get cut or what is not going to get cut. So we can see that it is, this whole section up here is not going to get cut out. But then if we also cut this section out here and cut this one on the outside, we see it's going all the way up and around. So if we cut this out, it will not fit just because of we need to have it trimmed off here. So that is where the inlay toolpath really functions and works well. There's a couple other tricks that we could do as well if we didn't want to do the inlay toolpath. There's another section of that's not going to quite fit there either. So when we're in the process, many steps prior to where we are right now is when we really should have been thinking about what cutter and how are we going to plan these curves and fits into that. We can still make some modifications to this, and that's okay since that is separate there. So again, let's take a look at what the inlay toolpath is going to do. I'm going to delete everything that's in our list. And going to use the inlay toolpath for this one. We're going to do it as a straight. One too far. It is a female and all the way through. Because the female will be cutting on the inside of that. We want to do a conventional cut, selecting an 1/8 inch cutter. You could work out tool pathing and bits and step downs and all that. I'm not focusing on that in this training here. So let's go ahead and calculate that. Ooh, almost. I'm glad for those warnings. I've saved my table many of times. So the female version really didn't do a whole lot different than what just the inside cut did. But when we go to toolpath, this one as the male version, we're going to get quite a bit different here. So this one, we want to do a male straight cutout, making sure that we do select the exact same diameter bit that we used for the female version, the 1/8 inch. And we can see how that has cut it short. And the reason for that is that now is going to allow this piece to fit into this piece that we have here. So what we have right now is just a lot of tool pathing in this fashion that we're going to have to really pay attention to in getting these cut. And knowing now that we have, how many different colors does Donald have on his head? So blue, black, yellow, a red, and a pink. So four different colors. What I would do is start separating them in separate jobs. You might be able to do and nest them out on separate sheets if you'd like to do that. But I would probably open up another instance of VCarve Pro. And start moving and creating the same material size, setup, and everything there. And start moving all the parts that I want to have blue over onto that sheet and toolpath them there. But before I completely do that, I'm working through all the different toolpath strategies as I see them here, because it's a little bit easier to make any kind of modifications to this at this point, rather than having it too far separated. In some aspects, I might already be, too many steps into the future to have saved me time. And that's kind of part of the learning process of doing this. There are steps that you may not think you need to think about at the beginning until you get to the end and you realize it really would have been nice if I paid closer attention to needing to cut this out with an 1/8 inch bit, like in his eyes right here. That's another area that's a sharp inside corner. How is that going to be affected when we put these pieces together? Is there going to be a little, pinhole or a hole left from getting these pieces mated together? So that is really where the art of this comes from, is understanding how these pieces need to get cut and how the design and the picture needs to be changed to still have it look good, but then also still have the ability to be able to cut it or cut it with a large enough bit to get there. So hopefully this has been somewhat useful, and I didn't ramble on too much or confuse anybody on anything. There's got to be questions out there, especially in a training like this where I don't know if I.
Hey, Ryan, this is Donald. I have a question. Maybe you're think if you're doing something simple like this, maybe less pieces, but almost like a little kid's puzzle, like for a 4-year-old type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
How would you tolerance the cutter? You're not trying to actually do an inlay.
Yeah.
So more, something like a little looser fit. How would you tell it to cut it a little bit wider?
Yeah, so that is done in a couple ways of doing it. One, if we were running it with the inlay toolpath, there is an allowance that can be used. So this is this allowance right here. I'm going to set that to be a 0.6, which is much larger than we need it to be, but I'm just doing that so we could see the extreme of what's going to happen here. And we can see that it's cutting, 60 thousandths to the inside of that line, quite a bit, farther in. So that opened up that tolerance a little bit. Now, how much of a tolerance you leave, I think, if it is a child's puzzle, and depending on what age, 60 thousandths might be, even though we think it's, too much, but for, a toddler putting a little puzzle like this together, might need that clearance to be able to have it more easily drop in place. So,
yep, that's exactly what I was wondering. So thanks.
Mm-hmm. So while somebody else is thinking of another question, I talked about the inside outside or being able to the inlay. If we didn't want to run this as a inlay, it's been a while since I've done it, but I'm going to use the offset feature here, and I'm going to be cutting this with an 1/8 inch cutter. So we're going to offset first to the, let's see, inside. We're going to offset it outwards by by the diameter. Let's see if that one works. Yeah, that gave us the rounded corner. And then I'm going to start offsetting to the inside. Let's see if this works. I might have done it backwards again. Wow, I'm all confused. I'm sorry. I flubbed that one. But there is a way to offset inside, outside, and such. But anyway, I apologize for that one. Eyebrows. How am I going to treat the eyebrows? I would probably just do a maybe an engraving on that. So, the outside border here, we would cut that straight out. Let's do a profile toolpath on the outside. And then for the eyebrows in all the little pieces here, I'm going to do another profile, only this time we're going to select a 60-degree V-bit. And I cut just barely into the material, 60 thousandths. Going to do that on the line. Calculate that. All visible toolpaths. And that is going to give us these little line effects right there, engraving lines. So hopefully that answered your question about the eyebrows. Right now I have the material set to be 3/8 of an inch. I had thought about cutting this out of some HDPE, plastic. And the reason why I thought that is because I happen to have some blue and yellow HDPE, and I think it might even have some white, because that would, if I had white, blue, and yellow, that would give us everything we need to do. Now, if you have a spire, you could take this one step farther and cut these all these individual pieces out, but then also create the 3D shape and profile them, and still have them all fit together and have it more be relief carving that is made up of separate pieces. So that could be fun. All right. Well, thank you all for coming, and everybody have a good day, and we'll see you next time.